Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, the podcast where we explore bold ideas that shape the future of medical affairs. Today I'm joined by Jenna Crabb. Jenna is our Digital Communications Strategy Director, and she consults our clients on helping them to engage with their audiences through digital means. Hi, Jenna.
Hello.
Glad to have
Great
you
to be
here. What are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about email and its importance in reaching HCPs.
Interesting. So tell me more.
So email's, I wouldn't say an overlooked channel, but it's a channel that not everybody thinks about as effective. And so we're going to talk about how you can build email into your medical affairs strategy in order to better reach your audience.
So you're saying email here, and I guess you're not talking about someone sending an email to someone else, but more about a mass communication strategy, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So sending email to a list of thousands of HCPs potentially, and understanding, through that email, you have your message. It can be well designed. It can look really nice. And then you can see the HCPs, what percentage are opening it, what percentage are engaging with the content, and clicking out to your HCP engagement platform or content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand you were referring to somewhat underutilized, because if I think about it, we get a lot of requests to help pharma companies communicate on social media, third-party platforms, and other digital channels. You never really get the request to help with email. Why is that?
So I guess not everybody thinks about email that way. Email is just a tool you use to communicate with your colleagues or friends or whomever. But email is really a tool that you can use to reach many people. So you have an email list, right? Emails could be collected through your HCP engagement platform for people who say, I'm interested in learning more. They could be collected at a Congress, the people who stop by a Congress booth, or, just lists from the Congress. You can purchase a list. So you can purchase a list based on the target that you want. So whether it's dermatologists who are in California, for example, you can very much target your list that way. And then you create, your strategy, your plan. How many emails are you going to send? What's the content going to be? What does it look like over a period of time? So you're not just sending one email. You're sending the latest information, whether it's in a newsletter format, emails around congresses, and the content you're presenting. So there's a strategy component too. It's thinking about what you want to be sharing with your HCP audience and how you're going to deliver it through email.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, that's kind of cool, because I hear kind of a chronological story here. So we need to get the email addresses to send to in the first place. Then we need to make sure we have a strategy so that we send the right things that actually engages people and doesn't create like a ton of unsubscribers and people opting out, right? So let's talk about that a little bit as well. And then how do you actually know it's working, right? So metrics and outcomes. To kind of set the scene, from your perspective as a digital expert, where would you place email in the list of channels in terms of their efficacy within medical communication specifically?
So pretty high up there, honestly. I would place it higher than, for example, social media. Of course, it's always going to depend on your specific audience. So if your audience is one that engages more on social media than others, then maybe that's not true, right? But in general, email is pretty high up there, and it is very effective.
Yeah. So in other words, since this doesn't seem to be done a lot, at least on the medical affairs side of things, there's a huge opportunity to leverage email more, right? Okay, cool. So let's start then at the beginning. So how do we get to having a database with email addresses that we can reliably send to? What are, potential caveats that people need to keep in mind when creating this list in one kind of way, including, like sender reputation and being marked as spam and these kind of things? Like, talk us through a little bit, but in high level, like what are some key points to take into account here?
Yeah, so in many cases, your company might already have a list of emails for your target audience in Viva CRM. So that's the first place, is check with the other teams within your company to see if such a list does exist. If it does, that's a great starting point. And also understanding how they're collecting further emails to add to that list. If it does not exist, some of so you can start collecting emails through a website. So you can say, sign up for a newsletter here. You can, again, go to Congress booths and, collect email addresses at the Congress booths or at Congresses in general. And then you can also purchase a list. Now, purchasing a list is, really the last choice. Ideally, it's organic because people are raising their hands and saying, I'm interested in this information. Please, send me an email, right? And whereas with lists, they're not always raising their hands to receive your email. And so you're going to see, if you use a list at the beginning, you're going to see there's a lot of unsubscribes very quickly because they didn't ask to be subscribed until you get to a point where you then have an audience that is interested in your content and has not unsubscribed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, it's kind of a scattershot approach, and you're maybe bothering a lot of people that don't want to hear about it. That's one way to clean up the list, right? And I know that in general, like talking about cleaning up a list, that is very important to do, right? And I think there's some tools you can use for that, but the lists that you would typically purchase are of lower quality, and there might be old email addresses in there that are not deliverable. And that, from what I understood from you in the past, that kind of hurts your sender reputation, right? Or your domain reputation.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that you want to make sure to do with your, when building your email strategy is use an email tool to send out your email. So you're not sending them out via Outlook or Gmail or, pushing send. You're using a provider, whether it's MailChimp or Salesforce or even Viva CRM, right? To send out your emails. And those systems will be then removing emails that bounce. It'll be managing the lists, the people on the list that you're not reaching, right? And removing them from the list. It'll manage unsubscribes. So it manages all of that. So you are kept safe from being blacklisted.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so to recap, it's important we build a nice, clean database with people that are actually interested in the information you have to share. And the best way to do that is to find those organically, right? So maybe if you have a conference activity or you have a medical affairs website or HCP engagement platform, you can build in forms where people could sign up. I think this is really using the different channels in the omni-channel mix, right? That where you should try to obtain those opt-ins and those email addresses. So let's say we successfully do so. Now we have a clean database with people that are interested in our information. Let's talk a little bit more about how much to send and what to send, right? So what is a good pace, what to take into account when you create an email strategy when it comes to the amount of emails you're sending out. And then after that, let's talk a little bit more about how can you make sure that the content actually resonates with your audience?
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing is with an email strategy. An email strategy should be part of your omni-channel communication strategy. So it's not something that is done in a silo. It is part of the other pieces of your strategy, whether that's social media, third-party platforms, MSL, communications, Congress booths, etc. So it's a part of the bigger picture.
Is MedComms evolving faster than your team can keep up? You're not alone, and you don't have to navigate it alone. Wesley Portegies, host of Transforming Medical Communications, is offering a limited number of 30-minute consultancy sessions for senior medical affairs professionals. Whether it's medical communications, field medical, or medical affairs training, these sessions are a chance to explore real-world challenges, pressure test ideas, and walk away with practical strategic insight. No fluff, just strategy. Book your free session now. Link is in the show notes.
So Jenna, how much is enough? How many emails should someone be sending?
So it's going to very much depend on your audience. So, and your content. So if you're sending valuable content out to your audience, they're of course more likely to engage with it, right? If your content is not structured well or not interesting or just hard to engage with, then you're going to see a lack of engagement. In terms of frequency, 3 to 4 times a month is kind of like the sweet spot, although you have to look at your analytics. You need to see how people are engaging with your content to understand if maybe that is too much for them, or if, there's an increase in unsubscribes after a email goes out, or if you see a decrease in them engaging with your content.
Yeah, so the metrics are really like leading in terms of defining this number, right? But what I've seen in practice is really that it's easy to kind of, how do you say that, like being a little bit too worried about people getting too many emails, right? Like I think from the sender side of things, and especially in medical affairs where we're not really yet used to most of these strategies, it can easily feel like, oh, we're overwhelming them. But then if you actually look at other industries, there's many companies that send me an email almost every day. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily pleased about it. Neither I'm always opting out, by the way. But I think like 3-4 times a month is actually a good number if your strategy makes sense, right? So it doesn't just mean blasting them with the same message 4 times, but like really thinking through about what are the different kind of emails that you could send. So how about that? Like, how could you put like, like a structure together that makes sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, you'll want to look at, let's just say you're figuring out your email strategy for the year, right? You want to look at the events that are happening, any kind of data releases that are coming, and you want to build around that, right? So you don't want to send an email out when you have nothing to say. You want to wait until there's content and information that will be of value to your audience. And so there's, for example, around a Congress that you're presenting several posters or oral presentations at, you might want to consider doing a pre-conference email to let everybody know that you're going to be there and here's the kind of thing that you're going to be talking about. You might, during the conference, want to remind the audience of all of the presentations that are happening. And then, after the conference, you might want to send another email saying, here are all the presentations. If you missed the Congress or the presentation, then here you can go and look at it on our website.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what I like about what you just outlined is this idea that we separate kind of the content from the channels, right? So email is just a channel. And sometimes we start mixing these things up, right? So we send something different over email than what we would send through another channel. While actually, the content should be the central theme of what you're communicating. And email is just one other method to bring you there, right? So it is all aligned to your central strategic communication objectives. And I really like that. And by maybe thinking about trigger events, right? So a conference would be a trigger, a data release would be a trigger. What would be some other triggers that we could use? Maybe a trigger could be time, like once a month, maybe give an update on across everything that happened.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could do a newsletter update, right? Like once a month, once every other month, depending on the cadence that works best. You could have an overview of all of the things that are happening in your therapy area or, that are going on that are important to your audience. It's just sort of as a recap. You could also use the newsletter to recap all of the activity and interesting information that happens in the Congress if you time it accordingly.
Yeah, and then of course, especially for the companies that have an HCP engagement platform or, the so-called medical affairs website, I think email is also a really important tool to let your audience know that there's new content, right? Because there might not be new content like every single hour, like in a lot of like other kinds of websites in other industries or news outlets. So HCPs are not gonna be on your website and wait for some new content to appear. In this way, it's a good way to flag them like, hey, we have this new interesting article on our page, and give a quick outline of what is there and an opportunity to hit that button and go there, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Just because you create the content and put it on a website, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to show up when you do that, right? You have to let them know it's there. And, again, email is part of full communication strategy that involves other pieces. And I think it's important to note that, you might send the email and they read the subject line, but they don't act on it, right? And then they see the same announcement about the research release or the content in another place, and they remember. And they say, oh, yeah, I wanted to read that. And so then they either go from the social media post to read the content or they go back to the email later. But reminding them that this content exists across channels is really valuable.
Yeah, and I think maybe for our audience, like, the power of email, a lot of you are probably listening right here because you got an email about this podcast just being launched, right?
Yep.
Cool. So now let's talk about metrics a little bit. How would you analyze the performance of an email strategy? What are some key metrics? Maybe we stick to the basics a little bit here. Like, what are key metrics that you need to keep an eye on? What are good numbers?
Key metrics, which again are going to be sort of driven by your content and how it's framed and whether it offers a good user experience. But so key metrics are going to be open rate. So, right, if a person doesn't open the email, they're not consuming your content. And so you want there to be a good open rate. Sort of an industry benchmark is 20% open rate is good. So if you're above that, great. And then once they open the email, you want them to engage with your content, because just because they opened the email doesn't mean they actually read it, right? And so you want to see click-throughs to your website or your content, wherever it is housed, to see sort of the engagement with the content.
Yeah. So, and I also think we have deliverability, right? So I think which would maybe come as the first. So we would have like 3 things to look at. So deliverability would tell you how good the quality of your list is.
Yes. And that takes us back to, when you have an organically grown list, your deliverability typically is going to be higher. People still move jobs and their emails change and things like that. So that happens. That's just part of life, right? Sometimes emails don't last forever. But if you purchase a list, maybe the deliverability will be a little bit lower, especially over time as time passes.
Yeah. And then open rate, I guess that kind of indicates how good you are at setting interesting subject lines and making sure people fully understand what they could expect in the email after they open it, right?
Yeah, sure. So first thing to know about open rate is there are email platforms that will or tools that will automatically open an email for you. And so it looks like somebody opened your email, but they didn't. And so you want to be cognizant of that. And that's then why the click-through rate and seeing the engagement with the content is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, of course, also like knowing that click-through rate is ultimately, I guess, out of these 3, one of the most important ones, because it really tells you like, okay, let's say the email got delivered in the first place, right? So it found its way into an inbox. Now someone saw the email and thought like, okay, this is worth looking into. Let's open this email. Or, it might be one of those systems that you were just talking about that might just open it. Then let's assume they're looking at the actual content, and now they need to make the decision to do something with that, right? So I think what is really important with these strategies is to give ample opportunity to do so, right? So good emails typically have a lot of hyperlinks and buttons and things in there that people could action on rather than just giving all the content away, right?
Yeah, so you want to have very clear calls to action on your content. So letting them know very clearly if they want more information on something that you've given sort of a little high-level overview. This is how they can get there. Click through to go to the website, right? You want the email design to be very scannable and easy to read, because you want them to just quickly be able to see, because everybody's busy, right? Our HCPs have a lot going on. So you want them to be able to quickly scan through the information and understand where there's value and where they want to read more.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in order to optimize these metrics, especially the second 2 ones, I guess it's important to experiment a little bit. Can you tell me more about how you can optimize these metrics?
Yeah, sure. So pretty much every email tool out there, except maybe Outlook, has the option to A/B test, right? So you can, or even ABC test, which is multivariate testing. So you can test multiple examples. But good, easy start would be test your subject line, right? Because the subject line tells the HCP what's in the email. And if the subject line isn't of interest to them, they're not going to open the email, right? And they're not going to see that it's a beautifully designed email with great call to actions and interesting content. And so you can A/B test 2 different subject lines to see which ones performs better. A lot of times systems will automate this. So they'll send a portion, let's just say the list is 20,000 people, right? They'll send 10,000 of those emails with A/B tests, so 5 to one email, 5 to the other. And then when there's a winner, they will then send the other 10,000 emails.
Great, Jenna. Thanks so much for explaining all of this. This is extremely useful. Is there any last piece of advice you would like to give to anyone kind of starting out in medical affairs, setting up a new email strategy?
I think strategy before you jump in and do the work is so important. Knowing who your audience is, what you're trying to communicate to them, and how you want them to act, right? So if your goal is to communicate information about data releases over a year's period, then it's important to know that and know who you're trying to reach to build a strategy rather than just jumping in and sending emails because you have something you want to say.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that's part of the omni-channel mission, right? And the right information to the right person at the right time. And I think email is a perfect tool to do that, but we need to be very considerate in using it. Well, Jenna, thanks so much for sharing your experience here on the TMC podcast. Really appreciate it, and see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by MedComms Experts. To find out more about MedComms Experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit med-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MedComms Experts, thanks for listening.